June 1462. Dawn breaks over a field in Wallachia. 60,000 Ottoman soldiers, veterans who shattered Constantinople's walls 9 years ago, have stopped walking. Not because of a fortress, not because of an army blocking the road, because of what is standing in the field ahead of them. The smell hits first, then the scale of it, row after row, extending further than one glance can hold, casting long shadows west in the early light. 3 kilometers wide, 20,000 figures, arranged not randomly, arranged in Ottoman military formation order, by rank, by unit, by hierarchy. This is a message, written by a man who commands fewer than 30,000 soldiers, rules a territory smaller than Portugal, and is already considered defeated by every court in Europe. So here's the question this entire story turns on. How does a man like that stop a machine like Mehmed II? Stay with me. Because by the time you understand what Vlad actually built, not just in that field, but across 20 years of captivity, exile, and preparation, you will never think about power the same way again. Picture this. You are Mehmed II. You have never turned back from anything. You took Constantinople in 53 days. You campaigned across 3 continents. Every opponent you have ever faced made the same rational calculation. Overwhelming force produces submission, and you bring overwhelming force. It has worked every single time, and now your advance guard is not moving. Somewhere behind you, your court chronicler Tursun Beg is watching. He will write about this campaign. He writes about everything. But when it comes to this moment, what the Sultan does next, what the Sultan says, what crosses the Sultan's face when he sees that field, Tursun Beg will leave the page almost blank. A court chronicler whose entire professional function is documenting the Sultan's wisdom and composure. Silent. That silence tells you everything. But here is what they are not saying in most accounts of this story. The forest of the impaled was not Vlad's primary weapon. It was his closing argument. The army standing in front of it had already been broken. 6 weeks of poisoned wells, burned crops, destroyed fodder supplies, and 14 documented night raids that made every camp feel like a target. 60,000 soldiers who needed to eat every single day. In a country where Vlad had deliberately destroyed every source of food across 200 kilometers before they arrived. Mehmed did not retreat because he was frightened by cruelty. He retreated because Vlad had made the invasion mathematically unaffordable. But how did Vlad know exactly how to do that? How did he know precisely what the Ottoman army needed, what it feared, and, most importantly, what situation it had never been built to handle? The answer is uncomfortable, because the Ottomans taught him. Every single thing he used against them, they taught him themselves. And to understand that, we need to go back 20 years. Back to a boy being handed to his father's enemies. Wallachia, 1442. Vlad's father, Vlad II, called Dracula, meaning the dragon, makes a political calculation. To maintain his position as Prince of Wallachia, he surrenders 2 of his sons to the Ottoman court as hostages. Vlad is approximately 11 years old. His younger brother Radu is perhaps 7. The name Dracula, the name that will one day sell 100 million paperbacks, simply means son of the dragon, a family name, nothing more. Here is what most accounts get wrong about what happens next. They treat the hostage years as pure suffering, a traumatic origin story that explains later violence. But look at what the Ottoman court in Edirne actually was in the 1440s. One of the most sophisticated political and military environments on earth. The Ottomans were not barbarians. They were administrators, strategists, and empire builders of extraordinary competence. Vlad spent 6 years inside that system. He learned Turkish. He studied Ottoman military organization from the inside. He observed, at close range, how Mehmed, then a young prince himself, thought about power. He learned specifically how fear functioned as a tool of statecraft, how an empire maintains psychological dominance over populations 10 times its garrison strength. He was not imprisoned, he was educated, at Ottoman expense, in Ottoman methods. Remember that, we will come back to it. Meanwhile, Wallachia was consuming itself. In 1447, Vlad's father was assassinated by Hungarian-aligned boyar nobles. His older brother Mircea was blinded and buried alive, a detail that contemporary Wallachian chronicles record without ceremony. because in this region, this was simply how succession worked. Vlad received this news while still inside Ottoman territory. He was approximately 16 years old. Grief is one thing. What Vlad did with it is another. In 1448, with brief Ottoman support, Vlad seized the Wallachian throne for the first time. He held it for less than 2 months before being driven out. He fled, and then he did something that the vampire mythology completely obscures about his character. He waited 8 years of exile, moving between Moldavia, Transylvania, the court of the Hungarian governor John Hunyadi, the very man who had ordered his father's death. 8 years of studying his enemies, building alliances, learning patience as a weapon. No impulsive strike, no reckless revenge, just watching, learning, and waiting for exactly the right moment. That moment came in 1456. Hunyadi died of plague in August. Within weeks, Vlad moved. He defeated and personally killed the incumbent prince. He took the Wallachian throne for the second time. This time he intended to keep it. His first acts tell you everything about how his mind worked. He identified the boyar class, the noble families who had murdered his father, buried his brother alive, and destabilized every prince before him as the primary internal threat. His solution was systematic and deliberately public. A banquet, an arrest, forced labor rebuilding Poenari fortress on the Argus River. Not random cruelty. Surgical removal of every internal vulnerability before the external threat arrived. He was preparing the board 3 years before the game began. Because from the south, a letter arrived. Mehmed II was demanding tribute and a personal audience. Look, a personal audience with the Ottoman Sultan in this period meant one of two things: submission or death. Every ruler in southeastern Europe understood this. The personal audience was a ritual of dominance. You traveled to Mehmed, you bowed, and you left as a vassal, or you did not leave at all. Vlad said no. But here is what most accounts miss. This refusal was not impulsive. It was the product of 8 years of exile, 6 years of Ottoman education, and a precise calculation about what Wallachia needed to survive. The calculation went like this. Wallachia could not outfight the Ottomans in open battle. The numbers were simply too unequal. But Wallachia could make itself so costly to absorb that the Ottomans would decide the price was not worth paying. Empires make rational decisions about where to spend force. If the cost of conquering you exceeds the value of what they gain, they move on to easier targets. Vlad's entire task was to make Wallachia as expensive as possible. In 1459, he stopped paying tribute. Ottoman tax collectors sent to recover it were captured, impaled. Ottoman envoys sent to demand explanation reportedly had their turbans nailed to their heads so they would never have to remove them again. Whether that specific detail is precise is debated. What is not debated is its function. Vlad wanted Mehmed to hear it. He was forcing a confrontation on his own timeline before the Sultan had fully committed military resources elsewhere, while Vlad still had years to prepare. Then February 1462, Vlad crosses the Danube into Ottoman Bulgaria with 20,000 men. He destroys 23 garrison towns in a single winter campaign. He kills 23,884 Ottoman soldiers by his own count, cataloged by location, by engagement, with the clinical precision of a military operations report. And he writes Matthias Corvinus of Hungary a letter detailing every action. He signs it, sends it, advertises what he has done. That letter survives. It sits in the Romanian National Archives, written in Vlad's own hand, February 11th, 1462. He is not hiding from Mehmed. He is summoning him. Because Wallachia is ready. The wells are being prepared. The crops are being marked for burning. The contingency plans for 14 different night raid patterns are already mapped. Vlad has spent 3 years converting an entire country into a killing environment, and now he needs the Ottoman army to walk into it. It is May 1462. Mehmed has crossed the Danube with somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000 soldiers, the largest Ottoman force assembled since Constantinople. And Vlad is not defending. He has already disappeared into the terrain. Here is what happens when an unstoppable institutional machine meets the one situation it was never designed to handle. The Ottoman military doctrine was built around a simple, consistently validated assumption. Bring overwhelming force. Create rational submission. Advance. Every previous opponent had confirmed this model. Bulgaria confirmed it. Serbia confirmed it. The Byzantine Empire, 1,000 years of Roman history, confirmed it at Constantinople in 1453. The model had never failed. But overwhelming force requires food. 90,000 soldiers eat an enormous amount every single day. Their horses need fodder. Their men need clean water. And Vlad had spent 3 years ensuring that none of these things existed anywhere in Wallachia. No crops, no wells, no villages, no fodder for 90,000 horses, no clean water for 90,000 men. When the Ottoman army needed to eat, it found nothing. When it needed water, it found poison. When it needed to fight, it found an enemy that was already gone. Vlad conducted 14 documented harassment raids in 6 weeks, striking supply lines, isolated units, command positions, then withdrawing before conventional response could organize. He sent people infected with disease into Ottoman supply corridors. He burned everything that remained. The Ottoman medical records from this period are consistent with epidemic illness spreading through the ranks. An army of 90,000 men, 6 weeks into a campaign, eating almost nothing and drinking contaminated water. The doctrine had no response to this. You cannot submit a countryside that has already destroyed itself. You cannot threaten populations that have already fled. You cannot use artillery against an enemy who is already behind you in the dark. Then the night of June 16th comes. Vlad makes a calculation. 6 weeks of attrition has broken the Ottoman army physically. One action remains. Remove Mehmed personally, and the institutional structure collapses without its head. Not a metaphor, a military objective. He leads 7,000 to 10,000 cavalry directly into the Ottoman main camp at midnight. His men wear Ottoman uniforms. He speaks Turkish. He knows the camp's organizational structure from his years in Edirne, where the Sultan's tent sits relative to the Janissary positions, how the command perimeter is arranged, what password sequences the night guards use. The camp is penetrated. Tursun Beg's account confirms significant Ottoman casualties and confirms the chaos. That followed. Vlad reaches within 300 meters of Mehmed's position before the Janissary guard closes. In the darkness, his cavalry misidentifies the Grand Vizier's tent cluster as the Sultan's. Mehmed has already moved to a secondary position. The primary objective fails, but every soldier in that camp now knows something they did not know 6 hours ago. No position is safe. No camp is defensible. No night will pass without Vlad somewhere in the darkness. The psychological certainty that makes an army function, the institutional confidence that comes from being the most powerful force in the room, is gone. Vlad loses an estimated 2,000 men on withdrawal. He does not turn back to fight them. He is already planning the next move. But think about what Tursun Beg writes at this point. He records casualties. He records the chaos. And then, where any other moment in the campaign receives detailed attention to Mehmed's composure and command, there is almost nothing. The Sultan's immediate response to a night raid that penetrated his personal camp is one of the most conspicuous silences in Ottoman historical literature. Something happened that the official record cannot accommodate, and then the advance force reaches the field outside Târgoviște. 20,000 figures across 3 kilometers of Wallachian plain, arranged in Ottoman military formation order, by rank, by unit, by hierarchy, so that Mehmed would understand immediately that this was not chaos. This was a demonstration of knowledge. Vlad knew the Ottoman army structure. He knew its hierarchy. He had reproduced it in the field outside his capital as a message that said, I have studied everything you are. I know you completely, and I have been waiting for you. Laonikos Chalkokondals, a Byzantine Greek historian, writing in the 1460s and 1470s, while people who had been there were still alive, records what happened next. The Janissaries, the elite Ottoman infantry who had stormed Constantinople's walls, requested withdrawal. Mehmed himself acknowledged, according to Chalkokondals, that a ruler capable of this could not be defeated by conventional means. The conqueror of Constantinople turned his army around. Let that land. The man who had never retreated from anything, who had fought campaigns across 3 continents, who had not been turned back by walls, by armies, by weather, or by any opponent in over a decade of continuous warfare, turned his army around and went home. Not because he ran out of soldiers, not because he was defeated in battle, because Vlad had made the psychological cost of continuing higher than the military cost of retreating. The Ottoman institutional assumption that overwhelming force produces submission, had been invalidated so completely, so expensively, that the Sultan made the rational decision to stop testing it. The doctrine failed, and when a military doctrine fails at this scale, the institution has no protocol for what comes next. So now we understand the field. Now we understand what Mehmed is actually seeing. But here is the part that stays with you, and here's the part that almost no account of Vlad ever addresses seriously. While Mehmed was retreating, Vlad sent urgent messages to Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. He had held the Ottomans, he needed men, money, and recognition. He needed his Christian allies to follow through on what they had promised. Matthias had already received the money. 40,000 gold ducats from Pope Pius II, designated for a crusade to support Vlad's campaign. Matthias spent it on himself. And then, in November 1462, he crossed into Transylvania with an army. Every court in Europe assumed he was marching to reinforce Vlad. He was marching to arrest him. The official charge was treason. Letters, allegedly written by Vlad to Mehmed, offering to switch sides, were produced. Mate Kazaku, whose 2017 scholarly biography of Vlad remains the most comprehensive modern analysis, concludes with the majority of current scholarship that these letters were fabrications, manufactured by Hungarian court officials who needed justification for what Matthias had already decided to do. Why? Because a Vlad who had stopped Mehmed without Hungarian troops was a Vlad who did not need Matthias. A Wallachia that could survive independently complicated Hungary's strategic interests in the region enormously. Matthias needed a dependent Wallachia. What he had was a defiant one, so he removed it. Vlad was imprisoned at Visegrad Castle, beginning in late 1462. He would remain a prisoner for approximately 12 years. 12 years while his brother Radu, the same boy who had gone into Ottoman captivity with him, who had converted to Islam and become a personal favorite of Mehmed, ruled Wallachia as an Ottoman client. The man who turned back the most powerful army in the world was imprisoned not by that army, but by the king he had been defending. Meanwhile, the Saxon merchants of Brasov, whom Vlad had economically regulated and punished during his reign, were commissioning something new, something that had barely existed before: printed pamphlets, produced in Nuremberg by Ambrosius Huber using Gutenberg's press technology, among the earliest mass-printed propaganda documents in European history, distributed across the Holy Roman Empire, full of accounts of Vlad's cruelties, his atrocities, his madness. Vlad was in prison. He could not respond. He could not correct. He could not contest a single word. The monster was being manufactured while the man sat in a cell. This is what power does after the battle ends. It writes the story. Romania remembers differently. Drive through Wallachia today and you will find Vlad on murals, on restaurant signs, on tourist merchandise that presents him not as a monster, but as a defender. Ponari Fortress still stands on the Argeș River, the stronghold built by boyar forced labor, visible from the mountain road, the wall still holding after 550 years. The Chindia Tower in Târgoviște, built during Vlad's reign as a watchtower over the Danube approaches, still stands. You can climb it. You can look south toward the river he defended. Wallachia survived as a distinct political entity for 4 more centuries after 1462, not absorbed as a province like Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece. Not erased. It kept its princes, its church, its laws, and its identity, paying tribute, accepting nominal Ottoman suzerainty, but maintaining the thing that every neighboring state lost: itself. In 1859, Wallachia joined with Moldavia to form the foundation of modern Romania. That is not a footnote. That is the consequence. 4 centuries of survival rooted in 6 weeks in 1462. And consider the geographic position for a moment. The small state on Europe's eastern flank, bordered by a powerful empire to the south, with unreliable allies to the west who make promises they do not keep. That description fits Wallachia in 1462. It also fits modern Romania today, on NATO's eastern border, watching a war unfold across its northern frontier. Some situations do not change. Only the names do. 400 years after the Nuremberg pamphlets were printed, a Dublin theater manager named Bram Stoker found a single footnote in William Wilkinson's 1820 account of Wallachia. That footnote, which mistranslated Dracula as meaning devil rather than son of the dragon, gave Stoker a name for his villain. The novel he published in 18 May had almost nothing to do with the historical Vlad. Different century, different country, entirely fictional, supernatural premise. But the name carried its accumulated weight. And once the novel became a cultural phenomenon, and then a film industry, and then a costume, and then a cereal brand, the fictional Dracula consumed the historical Vlad entirely. The military strategist became a vampire. The national hero of Romania became a Halloween decoration. That is what 500 years of successful propaganda looks like. So, back to the field. Dawn, June 1462, the Ottoman column that has not moved. But this time you know what Mehmed is actually seeing. Not cruelty, not madness. A message, written by a man who spent 6 years inside the Ottoman system as a child, 8 years in exile learning patience as a weapon, and 3 years converting an entire country into a kill zone. A message that says, I know how you think, I know what you need, I have removed all of it, and I have been waiting for you. There is a version of Vlad III that is a monster. The evidence supports it. The impaled bodies were real. The suffering was real. The poisoned wells were real, and they poisoned Wallachian families too, long after the Ottomans left. But there is another version, equally supported by the same evidence, of a man who looked at an impossible situation with complete clarity and found the only strategy that could work. A man who understood the Ottoman institutional psychology better than most Ottoman commanders, because the Ottomans had spent 6 years teaching it to him as a child. A man who, when every neighboring state was being absorbed, kept his country alive. Both versions are true, fully, simultaneously, without contradiction. The question is not which one is accurate. The question is which one history chose to remember, and who made that choice, and what they needed you to believe instead. Mehmed II kept a portrait of Vlad III. He was the only Christian ruler for whom such a record exists. The man who stopped the Ottoman Empire is on Halloween costumes. The man who imprisoned him is in history books as a Renaissance king. Power does not just win battles. It writes the story afterward. Always has.